Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The title or topic for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management or Legal Office Client Management, but the specific title name that you would provide as today's session is a CPD session is Law Office Client Management. It's been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. And as always, I kindly request you to use the chat window to ask any questions that you may have regarding the webinar. And if by any chance you're having challenges with your computer audio, then we request that you use the phone numbers that were provided in the email to dial in as well. So you have that option. Okay. Now, like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has this very specific agenda. The primary purpose really of this CPD session is to once again review this very important first step that a legal office entails in terms of its correspondence, communication, and interaction with both prospective and real clients, right? The client intake process. So we're going to talk about that. What does it entail? Pieces of information that you may be interested to capture. We'll talk about the compliance nature or the specific compliance documents that you may be asked for in an audit. What those documents look like, what pieces of information do you capture in those documents, and why are they important? We'll look into some of the fundamental first steps once you've done that intake around conflict checks, conflict check reports. Understand that if this is a situation of a non-engagement, the importance of delivering a non-engagement letter and bringing kind of almost a logical closure, if you will, for that relationship with that client. We'll certainly talk about the advantages for you as a legal office to manage clients in various different categories or groups so that it's easier for you to appreciate the types of customers that you're dealing with, especially if you're dealing with multiple areas of practices, their days of sale, their trend around interactions, revenue, etc. And once you've done that client intake, we'll also take a quick look at some of the important documents that are needed as part of that Law Society audit that most certainly you'll be asked for, including the documents such as a client data verification, an engagement or a retainer letter, and in some cases, documents such as source of contact, which is an interesting document and a report that a legal office could use. And last, we'll finish off looking at some of the key capabilities around analytics and why you should engage in better understanding the data within your legal office so that you can not only do better at serving your client, but you can internalize the advantages, the pros and cons really of various types of clients and how best you can adjust for your own success. Okay? Okay. So before, of course, I'm going to spend the next 35 minutes or between 30 to 35 minutes just walking you through these slides, and we'll definitely talk about this. And at all times, please use the chat window to make this a little bit more of a two-way street if you have any questions around these slides. And then I want to spend the last 5-10 minutes just using uLaw as an example of a practice management system and how it allows you to do all these certain set processes and the documents that you should think about while intaking the clients. Now, we at uLaw, of course, teach at various educational institutions around legal accounting, practice management, and in a very recent webinar that we conducted for College of Ontario here, we ran a presentation called The 7 Obligations of a Legal Practitioner. In fact, you can go to our YouTube channel and review that. That's a CPD session as well, if you have to claim your CPD. And one of the first obligations in that 7-step obligation, if you will, was the whole process around client intake, service, and communication. where we continue to talk about the importance of client intake, the importance of capturing the right pieces of information during that client intake. And in today's day and age, with the advent of technology, the ability for you as a legal firm, and of course most definitely post-COVID, the ability for you as a legal firm to be able to capture this information across various different communicative channels, right? You may have your website as a primary channel where you could actually have a form that allows you to customers to enter information to pretty much filter or pre-screen the prospective customers that want to work with your legal firm. You may send out a specific document that you may have drafted or created as a first step email to your prospective customer who has looked at your marketing campaign and has reached out to you. And there's many other means through which you can actually make it easier on your customer and yourself to capture that initial piece of information during that client intake process. One is capturing all of the information around your client, basic information such as first name, last name, right, a correspondence address, maybe an email, phone number. But also what helps is for you to also capture any specific areas of practices that they're specifically looking for your help. Either you've marketed well enough to showcase the specific areas of practice in your website, or if you have not done that, then you should have a well-written or well-drafted client intake form that captures that information for you so that then you can make meaningful next step decisions as to whether it even makes sense to work with this prospective client. Maybe there's an area of practice, maybe it's criminal law, and they just looked at you as a law firm that just reached out to you saying, hey, can you help me with criminal law, which does not make sense to you as a firm, for example, right? Now, once you've captured that client information, especially around the basic first name, last name, address, phone number, one of the fundamental first steps that I'm sure you already know that the Law Society talks about is delivering a specific search called a conflict check. Yes, that's an interesting question that and I'll address it right away. So typically what I'm talking to you about is working with private clients or non-corporate or non-company clients. If you are working with corporate clients, yes, you don't have to have specific personal ID. You either need the incorporation certificate or the article of incorporation, or sometimes you could have tax statements. So anything that allows you to verify the business, by all means. That is a first step, but we've also seen our clients go one step further. It's not mandatory that you actually capture it, but sometimes it helps if you have a company and then you've given them all the company information, but there's this very specific person that they want you to communicate with, and sometimes if that person is not directly employed by that company, we've seen that where there's maybe a licensed personnel or a contractor or a consultant, then you may actually need to ask for their piece of information as well. So sometimes it's a supplementary document when you're dealing with corporate clients. Thank you for a good question there. Regardless whether it's a private client or a corporate client, the next step around conflict check still remains, because in fact it remains to go granular one step further. So it's not just important that you search for Peter, who's a private client. It's important that you're able to search for Peter, who may have been a point of contact within a corporate customer such as Nike, right? So just to cover and have a better coverage around appreciating any conflicts that there may be based on who you've met and who you've spoken to and who you worked with. So the conflict check is really the next immediate step that you take, being thoroughly aware of conflicts, if any. If there aren't any conflicts, then that's great. If there are conflicts and you still want to move forward, then the Law Society, through the conflict check report, we would like you to outline what are the reasons that you think made you to move forward with creating a matter for this client despite the conflict. Okay, so we'll look at that report template as well. It's a great template for you to repurpose. Then, of course, you have this situation where there is a conflict and you don't want to move forward. Then comes yet another workflow step that reaches you to the non-engagement stage. So today's webinar is accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. And I'm reiterating that. Okay, so that's a big part of that client intake. Once you've done that conflict check and you've determined next steps, of course, you're going to move forward with creating a matter. Sometimes you may create the matter and then do the conflict check. So it really comes down to ensuring that you're covering all areas before you move forward with docketing, dispersing, signing retainer letters, etc. Right? You can still have a file as a logical placeholder to group all your documents and provide a bit of a context beyond just client information. I've seen companies do that, and you can most certainly do that as well. And of course, I'll focus the latter part of this slide quickly, because it really does not cover around client intake, but it's still a part of client management. So again, the topic for today is Law Office Client Management. Client intake is kind of that first step, but then you're also looking at file management as a component of the overall client management. So that moves on to the aspects of if you have created a matter and if you are moving forward, what does that retainer letter look like? Do you have a signed agreement with the customer? Do you have a retainer receipt that you're able to provide them as soon as they've made the payment? All of the scheduled invoices that you have to generate, whether you're doing trust transfers or you're waiting for payments, all of that becomes critical components of the overall files or documents or reports that come under client management. Okay? And I'm sure you're all seasoned practitioners. Some of you may be just entering the field. Regardless of your situation, what's important to keep in mind is a well-drafted, I would say, series of documents, not just a single document, depending on the area of practice that you may have, depending on the financial situation of that matter. It's always handy to have multiple, I would say, variations of a retainer letter, maybe one for fixed or flat rate matters. One could be specific for time and material. That could be one that has kind of a contingency. So there's various different templates that you could use for these retainer agreements depending on the situation themselves. Right? There could be a template specific for an area of practice, like family law. You could have specific documents specific to a POA. So really keep in mind how you're going to approach and be proactive and fast and able to deliver these documents to your customers so that you can stay on top of the game and be aggressive as a competitive legal firm, right? And some of the important aspects when you draft that retainer agreement starts off with really outlining the nature and scope of the matter. Is this a small claims matter? Is this a criminal matter? Is this a Provincial Offences Act? Whatever it may be, ensuring that you've clearly outlined the nature, scope of that specific engagement and that matter as well. Outlining client responsibilities. Again, consider each of these bulletins almost as a subheading within that retainer or engagement letter, right? Responsibilities, both yours as well as responsibilities that you expect out of the client. I've mentioned this many times. Sometimes it's really important to drive home the fact that the client has specific responsibilities around correspondence, around payments, around showing up at court on a specific date when that still was a thing. And it's important that you clearly articulate that in the retainer agreement, and also make sure that your customer has read through this before they sign up, because you then let them know that, hey, the rules of the agreement are well drafted in this document, and if you've signed this, then you really agreed to this, right? Method and frequency of communication. So how long would it take for the customer to hear back from you once that retainer agreement is signed? What is the scheduled correspondence? Is this only going to be the next communication going to be via email? Are you going to be using text, WhatsApp? What are also the channels that you use within your legal firm to correspond with customers? And are there any risks associated with those types of communication channels? So email. You have hackers who could, pretty much hack into your email system. Ensuring that you put a disclosure statement around the risks associated with any channel, again, helps safeguard yourself, your legal firm, of any risk that there may be, ensuring that the customer knows upfront what those risks are. One of my favorite, I would say, maybe first up or maybe last, would be the retainer termination details. We've really helped our customers many times drop this. We have a lot of templates that highlight the termination details, which pretty much results in an engagement letter. So this could be a good example of that is if a retainer top-up is not met, or if a certain timeline is not met, if the customer has not paid you within a specific period of time. Let's say your payment terms are net 15. I've typically seen retainer agreements which says, if you don't pay me in time, then here's the interest that we're going to start to accrue. And after a certain date and time range, then we're going to non-engage you. There's going to be a termination of this retainer agreement, right? So very critical for you to outline the termination clause for both yourself and for your customer. Okay, so you've done your client intake, you've created the file, you've certainly done the conflict check before all of that, and you've drafted a well-done retainer agreement, and then now you're going to go about your way docketing, dispersing, right, invoicing the customer, doing what you do best. As you progress through the file, here's a quick slide that can outline some of the important documents that you need to keep in mind and prepare for to create as part of the compliance aspects of the client management. You may do it right away. You may do it at the end of the week, end of the month, consolidated over a period of time, or do it just before an audit. Depending on the nature of how you approach that audit, it's still important for you to know the specific documents, or at least a good broad range of documents that you need to prepare for that audit. You may have already asked for the client ID verification, so you may have got a driver's license scanned document or a passport. But if you want to be thorough about the compliance aspect, there's actually a client ID verification form where you clearly outline that you have received the driver's license, and that's what you use as a verifying document. Or in the case of a corporate matter, you've used the incorporation papers as a way of verifying the validity of the business. Then, of course, there is a client intake form. So either capturing the form, if you've sent them a PDF that they fill out and sign back, so having a copy of that client intake form. Sometimes it could be an email with all the relevant information that's coming out of your website. So ensuring that you have that email part of that overall file management. And then starting with the retainer or engagement letter, the signed retainer document being part of that file. Retainer receipt, immediate next step. If this is a non-engagement, then of course we'll skip the whole retainer and then we'll go into non-engagement as well. And there's this conflict check report, which we'll look at, which is again a way for you to tell the auditor or the law society, these are all the reasons why I know for a fact that there is no conflict or there is conflict, and this is what I've done about it. Source of contact, we'll look at that report too. We've certainly heard from a few clients that it is being asked for. It's a document that auditors may ask for to just understand where are you getting your clients from. Is this more of a referral business, or are you actually getting clients from various different sources, right? And of course, it's always nice to have a well-drafted closure letter. So this is assuming that you've done a great job with the file and that file is completed. You did not take the non-engagement route, but it's taken the route of completion. And then you send them a closure letter which talks about thanking them for the opportunity in business, maybe a quick way to also talk about your website and all the other areas of practices that you deliver. Okay, subtle marketing, not too strong. Now, this was an important component of the overall client management, which is the frequency of communication that's outlined in a retainer or an engagement letter. And there's two different ways you approach the frequency of communication, right? One is, of course, based on what you know at the start of the game, outlined in a retainer agreement. For example, you would say that invoices would be generated as and when a docket or a disbursement or a transaction has occurred, or if it's a contingency, then that's a totally different situation. But you may then still go ahead, and let's say this is a corporate client, and sometimes you have statement of activities that are needed on a periodic basis beyond the invoices, beyond the other information that you share private clients. If it's an ongoing case for several years, then there may be logical break time where you need to send them certain correspondences on what's happening. For example, trust listing, just to make sure that you're refreshing their mind that this is everything that's happened. Typically, a statement of activity would carry that as well. But the idea behind this slide, depending on your situation, is to just remind you and highlight that the Law Society does request you to keep a tab of the frequency with which you communicate with your customer, depending on the nature and scope of the matter. At least make it, if it's a long-lasting, ongoing for a very long time, ensure that you're having quarterly updates with relevant information being shared. And certainly finish off with that closure letter that we spoke about, a final settlement or statement of settlement that talks about all the finances involved in that matter. I got this retainer on this date, this is what I invoiced you and did a trust transfer on this date, so on and so forth. Okay? The one other thing I would add to this is once you've completed a file, let's say you've got a closure document sent out and you've got the receipt back from the customer saying, yes, I've received it, I signed this off, thank you very much, and we're done. It's a nice habit, if depending on what systems you use. In uLaw, for example, you can mark a matter as closed or archived. So just turning off the file status from active to something more logical around closed or completed helps. It helps in a big way for you to focus your energy on always the active files. And also it gives you a sense of accomplishment and a sense of success once you have those files closed, because you can always review them. Those closed files can also be some of your best templates to repurpose as well. So you can, of course, look at those templates as a way the next time a criminal matter comes about, you can review this criminal matter that you've delivered to see if there's any commonalities and best practices that you can gain from. Yeah. Okay, so now we move into maybe not so much compliance in nature, but more in terms of your own best practices for business efficiencies around the idea of categorizing or classifying groups of contacts. So there's a quick question around the difference between closed and archived. Now, technically there isn't a huge difference between closed and archived in the case of uLaw. The reason why we kept archived was we had situations where customers would do the one-off matter, which is really not their specialty, but they would do it for a friend or a family member. And they really didn't want to deal with those matter types, and hence they just wanted something which said it's neither open or active or closed. It's those one-off matters that they want to use for. Now, what we're starting to educate our customers is use the archived as a way of templatizing matters too. So you can use archived if you're not really using archived today. Use it as a way of templatizing those best practice matters, so that before you create the next similar area of practice, you can look at your archived and, as I said, gain from best practices. But technically, there isn't a major difference. It's how you use them. Now, when it comes to grouping these contacts, we, of course, give you kind of a head start in terms of key categorization or classifications. So one could be area of practice. Here are all my clients within my family matter. Here are all my clients within small claims, landlord and tenant board, etc. You could manage clients by grouping them based on the relationship that they bring to a matter. Okay? So what is their party type? Are they a defendant, plaintiff? Are they the applicant or respondent in a family matter? Are they a landlord or tenant in an LATB matter? Again, this gives you an understanding of the type of clients that you tend to work best with. So let's say a majority of your clients are plaintiffs. Maybe that says something about a majority of your clients are tenants. Maybe that also, over a period of time, talks to you about your expertise, subject matter expertise that you've gained. Maybe that's your strength, right? So that's just another angle through which you can look, or a different lens through which you can look at your customer information. Now, in the case of uLaw, and again, I'm bringing that up only as an example, we also allow you to categorize person and people and company information as contacts. Clients being one of the types of contacts, and you can, of course, have various different types of contacts. So taking your mindset away from just client, just for a second, you could potentially also look at contacts as a way for you to look at colleagues, third-party vendors that you use for payments, right? So that's, again, slightly away from client management, but I just wanted to take that segue to say that as a company or as a business, you may still be able to repurpose contacts as a business function to categorize non-client contacts too. Okay. Ghost clients, one of my favorite categories of that. We pretty much brought that feature early in the game. It was a way for you to categorize or classify prospective clients who kind of flirt with the idea of engaging you as a legal professional, give you maybe some pertinent information, and then disappear, as the name sounds, right? And the Law Society does want you to mark those ghost clients as ghost clients, and then bring a logical closure after a certain period of time of patience that you have had with that customer or prospective client, and then generate a non-engagement letter and bring a closure to that ghost client too. But pretty much keep that information in the database for conflict searches, right? So that could be another category of customers or clients that you can manage or you should think about managing. And the last, which is more a marketing component, is understanding where are these clients coming to you as a business from? What are the different marketing channels that's working for you? One is to internalize the types of customers. The next one, this is again not a compliant aspect, but it does kind of borderline touch the source of contact, so I'll still go ahead and say it is a bit of a compliance. So source of contact may be a great report that helps you with both of these. Gives you the compliance nature, also in a way allows you to internalize where you're getting your customers from. Maybe there's a Facebook campaign that you're running, and if you're getting a lot of customers over that period, that means that the campaign maybe is working, right? People are noticing your ad. Okay. Now let's say you have done the conflict check. In terms of creating that conflict check report, we call it a two-step process. One is, of course, do a conflict screening or a check. And I use those terms in the same light. That is to first scan your entire database of clients and essentially highlight to you potential conflicts. Okay, that's a starting point. We always encourage you to go one step further and some due diligence manually beyond what the system can tell you, to go granular one step further and ensure that there are no conflicts. So let's say you may have a sounds like, or you may have Peter, let's say Peter Piper, and you've created a matter for someone called Peter Bunny. So the system would tell you that there is the instance of another Peter Bunny, and you have created a matter for that. But that's pretty much it. So that's your starting point for you to go and then do some due diligence, check on Peter Bunny, make sure there's no conflict, internalize it, and then reflect it in step 2 in the form of a conflict screening report or form. And this is a template that's available to you for download from the Law Society's portal. Systems like uLaw give it to you as part of the overall compliance package. And if you're doing this manually, then here are some of the pieces of information that you may want to capture. That is, who was handling that call? So when you got that client intake, who was managing that correspondence? We spoke about the basic information around first name, last name, correspondence address, if any, a correspondence number or email, right? Talk about the steps taken clearly, and this is really your opportunity to highlight how you determine the conflict or not. And this is very critical for you to outline this in this section to the Law Society about your next step. If in some cases we've seen legal firms, right, recommend or refer a client, maybe there's a conflict, but you are a really thorough professional and you see that there's a colleague who can really help out, or you think that they may be able to help out, so you may refer this prospective client to another colleague. In that case, this particular document asks for that. So did you refer the client to someone else? If yes, what is the situation? Okay, so we'll look at this report in a brief moment. So this is the conflict screening, conflict check report. All becomes part of that overall information package that you have regarding a client. And last but not the least, just a quick highlight, very similar to the groups that we were discussing about the types of client. The analytics is just a faster, easier way that we believe that you can consume data. Of course, you have reports that are compliant in nature. There are reports that you can generate that has a certain structure and data formatting. The analytics is another form of representation of that same data in a more graphical, user-friendly interface. Again, this is not a plug for uLaw, but ideally, if you are a uLaw customer, then you know that you can drive these analytics right from your phone. And we want you to start thinking about these aspects of data and how best you can repurpose the information within your own legal data to make good, informed, smart business decisions. Right? So one good example of that would be understanding who are your top pro bono clients. Right? Have you ever asked yourself that? Now, who are my top clients in terms of revenue? Which area of practice, which is pretty much a simulation of all clients, which area of practice brings my business the most revenue? Which employee within my legal company does specifically well in which area of practice? So you can start to really find a broader spectrum of information assimilation based on the data that already exists. So with every transaction that you're entering into the system, behind the scene, there's a database that's collecting it, and there's a reporting or analytical engine that's drafting all the information in sizable bytes. Okay, so we highly encourage you to start to explore the use of analytics, regardless of which system that you use. Even if this is manual, even if you're using Excel sheets, you could use analytics coming out of these Excel sheets. You can do your own summaries of these Excel sheets, right? And this really allows you to know the unknown and either react to the situation or be very proactive about that. And with that, we have another 24 minutes remaining in our CPD session today. Just wanted to quickly recap for those who did join a little bit late. The topic for today is around law office client management, specifically highlighting the client intake process every step of the way from the time that client intake happens to the next series of steps around conflict screening and all of the compliance documents that you have to create along the way as you create the matter file and all of the other supporting documents that help push that file forward towards a completion, right from a retainer letter to a closure. Okay? I'm going to just pause just for a brief moment just to see if there are any additional questions pertaining to what we've discussed so far. I'm definitely going to jump now to a demo mode where I can pretty much walk you through a simple workflow of how you can do the client intake and all of the necessary documents along the way and go down that path of compliance around client management. So I'll just take a quick pause. I'll wait for any questions that you may have. So this webinar is being recorded, will be available on our YouTube channel. So we have a question whether there are previous CPD sessions. Okay, I'll take a quick pause here. So on our website, info.uLawPractice.com/webinar, we already have a list of all of the CPD's non-CPD webinars that we have for this entire year, or at almost mid-year, I think, till June. And we're continuing to add to this, like for example, this is a very interesting topic later this year about automating your own forms within uLaw, right? We provide you templates, allow you to customize it, but now we're pretty much allowing you to do everything that you need right from scratch. So today's session was around client management, and the next one is around client portal. So you can first review this website, register yourself, and we send you quick notifications. In addition, you can go to our YouTube channel or just go to YouTube and then search up uLawPractice. And under webinars, you would find all the past webinars that have been recorded and available to you. And there are some webinars labeled with CPD, and you can watch the entire 1 hour if you like, and then claim that 1 hour CPD. Okay? Hope that answered the question. Alrighty, so let me shift my gears to a demo mode here. I'm going to correlate between the agenda and the platform. Okay? I'm using our 6 years character, Roger Moore, whose legal office that I've been utilizing for many years now. Yeah, if you're having any challenges with your laptop computer or your iPad audio, kindly do use the phone numbers provided. I can just maybe type in the one for Ontario. Maybe I can request the support staff to enter it for the other provinces. But I'm just going to go ahead and enter it for you here. I see some of them have had some challenges with the audio, so we do apologize. And here's the number for that. Awesome. So I'm going to continue with the webinar the next 15, 18 minutes by presenting to you, and then we'll leave some minutes at the last for questions. Logged in into uLaw as Roger Moore, this fixture's legal practitioner out of Canada, specifically Ontario. Got all his information here. This is how we set up a particular legal office piece of information. And on the left-hand side is where we have all of our menu options, at least the main menu options here. And one of the first is around contacts. As I mentioned, in uLaw database, we're capturing people, company information, regardless of whether they're a client or not. Okay. So if there's a quick question around multiple contacts having the same address. So essentially what we've done is we allow you to capture both that piece of information as individuals within the contact database, but you can relate them within a matter. So for example, if it's a joint retainer situation, you can create for a specific person, let's say the spouse, the wife, could be Jane Smith and Peter Smith. So you create Jane Smith and Peter Smith as individuals replicating the address. But then when you create, let's say, a rental agreement, you could actually add them as a joint retainer. That we are bringing the relationship of these two individuals, because they're individuals at the end of the day, but they join together in this matter as the relationship of that of a joint retainer. Okay, so the relationship is built within the matter. At the contact level, you're still storing their information individually. Now, there are different ways, and as I mentioned before, that you can enter the client intake. The simplest way is to be able to say add the clients. Here is Mr. Henry Jameson, just a random name here. Let's just say HJ. Source of contact. So I mentioned this before. We highly recommend, if you're not doing it today, regardless of the system that you use, that you do ask for this. How did you get to know the firm? And then capture that data. You can use the notes pretty much to enter all of the initial consultations prior to even creating the matter. Okay? So basic information here at the contact level or the client intake level. And so this is assuming that you're on the phone and you're entering this, or you've already written it down, and then you're repurposing that information into the system. Yeah. And we'll click the save button. So I'm not saved any phone, email, website, because I've gotten all this information. I'm manually entering it, and I'm cool with that. So basic information that's being saved into the database as part of that client intake process, simple client intake. Okay. Now, you may also have a document that you may want to send your customer, like a PDF, an editable or a fillable PDF, such as this, where they can enter. So imagine sending this PDF via email, and then them entering this information and sending it back to you. Now, this particular form, you can create your own template, and we help you through that process. We'll also give you this starting template to start with. So we have some examples here. So you have a generic, a family-specific client intake form. There's one for the French language as well. But now with the aspect of automation and tagging, you can pretty much create your own form. Okay? So this is a second way in which we enable you to accept that client information. The first was over the phone, you're typing it in. Second is sending them a document, having them pretty much fill it in. And in fact, you can import it. You don't even have to type it in back. So once you have that specific client intake form as a PDF document filled in, all you have to request the client to do is save all of the pertinent information and then hit validate. Then the form would tell you what piece of information is missing. Save that document, send it back to you, and then all you have to do is upload that intake form, and it creates a matter or contact just like this. So that's the second way in which you can do a client intake. The third, more recent way that we've incorporated is using a client portal, where you can essentially create and we're going to talk about this next week as a webinar, but just to give you an example, so let's say I use a email address, and there's a secret key that you've got to create for your own firm so that we don't randomly allow you to do it. You can take that particular and email a secure form to your customer. Okay, so you could say, hi, kindly fill in this information. So you're really delegating this work back to the customer, and you can create this form in such a way that you're putting some checks and balances so that if without that information, you're really not going to entertain intaking that client, because intaking a client is also time, and time is money, right? I believe I did send that email out, so maybe it's just taking a little bit of time. So I'll get to it when I get to it in terms of once I receive that email. And I'll show you how you can do that intake. But imagine the customer filling out that information at their own leisure. Okay? In fact, I could just put it on like that. There you go. So imagine the person, I'm just going to change it. I'll say Frederick Avenue in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I don't know the postal code there, but I'm just going to make it up. Actually, if you can help me with the postal code there, that would be great. Again, if this is a corporate client, you can talk about the company information, the phone number. So essentially, this particular web form, people want to have this information filled in. Okay? And this particular information in star is needed because what happens is the fact that this is on the web, we don't want people to misuse this form because it's a custom form built in for that specific client. And you want to make sure that it's filtered, all of the information is captured before you have all of this information bombarded. So you could say, I would like, to create how to create the secret key. So I'll get to it in a second. So I would like to create a will for my family. How did you hear about us? So that's going back to the source of contact. You could say Facebook or whatever, friends. So this is the question around what is the type of identification you can provide. I am happy to provide my driver's license. Okay. And the email. Again, making sure that they acknowledge that this is very branded. This is for Roger more specifically and his corporation. You're authorizing him to communicate by the email address provided and to state the contents of this form are true to the best of your knowledge, making sure you're not a robot, and you hit submit. If some data is not right, then we give out that information. Two things happen once that web form is sent out. One, you receive an email saying, hey, you have a new client. So imagine you being on the phone and you get this client. So it's a client intake form, is the titles. The minute you see it, you're going to see, okay, who's the customer, email, etc. So now we go one step further. Okay, you can of course tag this using our uLaw toolbox and tag this email to that email address. We discussed this in my previous webinar, but you can do that. You can just go ahead, search for a customer, and then pretty much docket this email under a matter. Okay, I'm going to skip that for today. Stick to the plan. Come back to uLaw. And here is Mr. Henry Jameson that we just added online. Okay? Or maybe this was us. Give me a second. Oh, there it is. Jameson Kingsley. So this was the online intake form that you generated out of uLaw, sent to Kingsley, and then he filled it out, sent it back to you. You received an email, but one step further, that information got securely stored into your database. So 3 different mechanisms to do the client intake first step. Now, how do you create the secret key? You just go into your settings, go under contacts, and the last option here is to create your own secret key. We recommend at least a 14 to 16 digit to make this as hard as it can possibly be so it's not cracked. And then you set the portal integration to uLaw portal. Okay, so you've done your due diligence, you've got that client intake form, and then the next immediate step is to go ahead and do what we spoke about, which is around conflict screening. So to do that, the first thing you do is click on the conflict check button. If you're users, you probably have done this. I'm going to do on a first name, last name basis. So this is where the advent of cloud helps, because you've got uLaw searching behind the scene for any instance of a Jameson or a Kingsley. You can make this conflict search as granular as you like. You could check if there's any matters that you've created for such a person. Have you come across such a person in any of the other dockets? Okay. So here's the first search just on the names. And you can see there's a James Brown, sounds like Jameson. There's a Nick Kingsley, interesting. There's a Larry King, so you kind of get the idea. Now you can of course use our contact search to type it in, so you could pretty much do this search to begin with. But this really comes down to understanding just the contact at the contact level. You could also use the matter search. So there are all Kingsleys for whom you've created the matter. So this is another way of searching the system for information. But having said that, the conflict search gives you a document such as this that's compliant in nature. It tells you more specifically the date and time, and it puts it in a kind of a legal binding document. This is you being able to tell the Law Society audit with confidence that you took the step of doing a conflict search on the 11th of February, and this is the information that you're basing your next decision of moving forward with the file. Okay? So let's say you've done your due diligence, you've done your conflict search, you're confident to move forward, you create the matter. And let's say this is an NATB, Kingsley, Boris, eviction. Now, in terms of grouping, there's two ways of doing that in uLaw. And then, again, this is for your own benefit in terms of if you plan to categorize customers as well. So the same Jameson Kingsley is currently apologies. Is currently part of the client group, but you can also add him as part of the landlords group. And these are groups that you can create. You have the ability to create as many groups as possible. So the same Jameson Kingsley can be part of your clients group because you just added him as a client. But if you go into your landlords group, you can also see Jameson Kingsley there. We're not duplicating the data. We're just categorizing or tagging the same contact across multiple different groups so that if you want to give it a glance by looking at the number of landlords that you work with in your career, you can do so if that makes sense to you. Right, so you can really create your own group. So let's say landlord GTA. So if that's a category that's meaningful to you, we create that group for you, and you can add your clients by just clicking group and add them to whatever group you like. Okay, so that's one other way of further categorizing the customer. Now, with another few more minutes remaining, I'll look at the compliance component of it. So you've got a compliance panel within uLaw that pretty much gives you all of the relevant documents to look for. So here's a client data verification document. So here's the LSO client for an individual or organization. So let's say this is an individual. Okay, so I think this is a more updated one. So it gives you all of the relevant information, the date, again, you can fill this out. This is, we give you a starting point at it. Okay. So this could be used for both individuals as well as organizations. Okay. Alrighty. Client intake, we've already looked at that, so you can use the client intake email or the document that they sent you. Or if you fill this in, then you can fill out this template, basically giving you, again, all the same information. And this is where you could essentially sign this as well if you've manually entered that information. Conflict screening report. I want to highlight this particular document. This is a way for you to clearly bring a logical closure to this individual file by saying that you don't plan to, this is all that you did. This is a new client. You could say search uLaw database, attached conflict search report, conflict search screening results. And you can attach this along with that. And this is where you clearly see there's no conflict, possible conflicts, conflict confirmed. If there are conflicts, you can say, I know there's a conflict, yada, 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 yada. Did you decline the retainer? No. Did you refer them to someone else? No. And you sign this and you file this. Retainer letter. We have quite a few samples. We have this where you can create them in Word or PDF. It gives you a starting point. And as I said, today uLaw has evolved where you can create your own forms and tagging them. These are templates that have been, some of our kind clients have provided us with repurposing it. Some of them we've built as best practices. and we pretty much do all of the word merge for you. All the sections. Here's the termination of legal services category, right? And closing letter. So this is where you could say, we will take this opportunity to thank you for the following. Okay. And that's it. If this is a non-engagement, then there's a template for that as well. All under the compliance panel. Okay? It's clearly saying that, hey, due to this such and such situation, we're not going to be moving forward with this particular file. So again, I am at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. So today's session was around law office client management, the importance of that intake process, doing the conflict search, creating the matter, generating all of the important law society documents, right from your conflict screening report to retainer documents, ending to a closing letter or non-engagement. This webinar is being recorded, will be available on our YouTube channel as early as Monday. And I will complete this with the last report for today, which is around the source of contacts, because I promised to show you that. So here's the source of contact document that clearly outlines where you're getting your customers from based on this information that you've entered into the system. So this is a compliance document which clearly says you've got 25% from friends, 25% from Facebook, another 12% from family. And there's a couple, like David Superman and Mindy, who have not yet been categorized. Okay? So with that, I'll draw a conclusion to today's webinar. I want to really thank you for this wonderful participation. I hope this was your time well spent. And I'm sure you have questions, and if you have any, please do reach out to us at support@uLawPractice.com. I'll be more than happy to help answer those questions.